I've shared with you before that about 5 years ago, I learned just an absolutely shocking piece of information that changed the way I did everything in my life, the way I related to my family, the way I related to friends, the way I did my work as a pastor. It just absolutely, utterly shattered everything I had always done and how I had lived. And that was, I learned that I can't change anyone but myself. You see, I spent my whole life trying to get other people to do what I wanted them to do. I thought that's what leadership was. Leadership in the family, I tried to get my children to do what I wanted them to do. Tried to get my wife to do what I wanted her to do. Tried to, even when I was a boy, to get my mom and dad to do what I wanted them to do. Didn't always work. I tried as a pastor to get my churches to do what I wanted them to do. And I thought that's what I was supposed to do. When people visited the church, I tried to get them to do what I wanted them to do, to join. And then about 5 years ago, I read this book, and it absolutely blew my world apart because it said, you can't change anybody but yourself. And that is the approach we have to take as a church when we talk to the world. We got to go out and understand this world and engage this world, but it's not our job to change the world. We can only change ourselves as we seek to share with the world the truth of Jesus Christ. That's an important concept for us. Now, it's also important, if we're trying to reach people outside the church, we need to know how they feel about us. And now this book we've been preaching out of, called Unchristian, was really done as market research for people 30 and younger and who are outside the church, how they perceived the church. They perceived it as unchristian. But let's unpack that, as they used to say when I was in seminary. Let's open that up and look a little deeper. What did they specifically think about the church and about Christians in the church? First off, and it hurts my feelings, they think we're boring. And I don't mean a little bit boring, I mean really boring. They're like, let's see, now let me see what you do. You go on Sunday morning when it's beautiful outside for the first time in a while, and you listen to this fat man in a black robe talk. And you want me to do that on purpose? Why in the world would I want to do that? And that's what you want me to do with my life. I'm not so sure. They think we're boring. I'm not even going to ask you to vote on whether you think my sermons are boring or not. I'd be scared to know the information. They also think we're unintelligent. Now, we may disagree with that. I'm not saying that their perceptions are accurate, by the way. I don't necessarily think our worship is boring. But I'm talking about their perceptions. You see, I can't really relate to them and engage them till I actually listen to what they say about me. And they think Christians are unintelligent, that they're anti-intellectual. Now, if you were not a Christian and all you knew from out there was what you read in the papers, what you see on television about the Christian church, some of our pronouncements make us look like we're absolutely not only ignorant but proud of it. That we want to live as if the world was the way it used to be when it's not that way anymore. And we refuse to see the modern world as the modern world. And for people outside the church, they're like, well, why would I relate to an organization that is absolutely this is the next thing, out of touch? That they don't really understand what's going on in the real world. And then they say we're out of date. You know, the church is looking at things as if it were a long time ago. They live in this time capsule, they think. And that we don't really understand the complications of the world out there, that we don't really understand society out there. Now, again, honestly, most of us feel, and I think we probably do, have a deeper understanding of the world out there because we work and live in that world out there than people think we do. But I'm talking about their perceptions of us. And this is not my assumptions. This is market research. This is actual facts, interviewing people out there who do not go to church to say, what do you think of the church? And they say, it is outdated. It is out of touch with reality. There's no purpose. There's no reason. There's no rhyme why I would ever go to church. It has no meaning in my life because the church has no understanding of the real world. They also think we're rather simplistic. They say the world is a complicated place now. Society is complex. And we really need people able to understand complexity to look at how to deal with all the various cultural and other influences that impact the lives of people today. But the church sits over there in its simplistic way and says everything is this and this and this, and then they lay out a bunch of rules and say this is how you're supposed to live. And they don't really understand the complexity. After the sermon at 8:30, I had somebody meet me in the hallway and said, let me tell you about a family member of mine who's going through this situation, and they say the church does not understand what I'm going through. That's exactly what I was preaching about. That we have this simplistic view, we don't understand the complexity of the world, and because they're simplistic, we just lay a bunch of rules out there and say, this is what you're supposed to do. Now, how are we, if we're the ones who are trying to reach the world out there and share with them what we believe is the only life-changing force there is, what do we need to do differently to understand and engage the hurting and broken world out there, outsiders outside of us? The key is in that first part, understanding. We've got to understand people out there. First thing, it's a more diverse world. It's a lot more diverse than it used to be. I grew up in a small town where most everybody pretty much was the same. We had a couple of different groups in the community, but there weren't more than a couple of groups. The world is so much more diverse now. Multicultural sits in our community, as was said last week. It sits right in the midst of our community. We've got to recognize that. To stick our heads in the sand and pretend that everything is like it was in the 1940s and the 1950s will lead us nowhere but to where the mainline church is going. We lose an average of 50,000 members a year in the United Methodist Church. And we have every year since 1969. We have averaged 50,000 members a year. What has the population of America done since 1969? I don't even want to conceive of what that is. We've got to recognize that it's a diverse world out there. And we got to see it as such. We also have to see the fractured part of the world. The world is different now. One of the things that Kathy and I know about our young adult children is that probably they're going to get laid off 3 or 4 times in their lifetime if they're lucky. It may be more than that. Job security, where that used to be a part of our lives and is for a good number of us, still a part of our lives, doesn't exist for our young people. It's not there. It's fractured, that part of society. And the experts tell us it's never coming back. It's never going to be that way again. So we've got to understand that our young people live with an understanding that they can be out of work tomorrow. Now, I I know that some of us in this very room experience the same thing. I'm not saying we don't. I'm saying the world out there doesn't know we do. I'll talk about that later. But it's important for us to understand how fractured society is. Violence, violent crime is 3 or 4 times higher than it was when I was a child. That's a reality. That is not something that we can run away from. Society is much more violent than it used to be. I don't like that. I don't want it to be that way, but I've got to recognize that. It is important. Our young people live in that because they often live in areas and they often attend places where that violence is more prone. And for us to pretend that that's not there does not only them a disservice, it does our Lord a disservice. There's also an inner desperation. There's so many that are lonely. Now, don't misunderstand me. Again, I'm not talking about reality, I'm talking about perception. I know there is often within the very confines of the church itself that same inner desperation, that same loneliness, that same struggle. But let me tell you, it's out there as well. In the same way we don't often understand it or honor it inside the church, we don't understand it or honor it in the world out there. There are hotels and motels and small houses and apartments filled with individual people who are lonely and scared and depressed and struggling with their lives.